Or cash.
So it sounds like machine has it. All three judges, do you have it? All right. And everyone good for me to start? The story of U.S. alliance commitments is a story of debt imperialism, the economic logic and form of empire that allows the U.S. to transform its position as the world's greatest debtor into one of colonial conquest and anti-black violence. That's Kim in 18. The U.S. exercises debt imperialism by virtue of the status as the greatest debtor in the world, given the central role of U.S. global finance in the world economy. U.S. default on its massive debt would radically destabilize the architecture of racial capitalism. Fears of apocalyptic rest are exploited as imperial domination, institutional violence, and threat of military retaliation compel the world to submit to band of political authority. That imperialism is the economic logic of arm of U.S. military and militarism and military empire. It's no coincidence that the U.S. has a strong military presence in this creditor nation like Germany, Japan, and South Korea. The U.S. is not only the biggest military power, but also the world's biggest landlord. The biopolitics of settler colonialism form a transnational proving ground within settler societies to produce a white settlers have very imperial projection abroad. If that imperialism is a promise that does not require keeping this proving ground as a promise that does not have to be made at all. Regimes of militarism as colonial and neo-colonial nexus of state and capital that generates military logic beyond formal military institutions and install militarized indebtedness onto the colonized made to be indebted to the U.S., whereas military individuals rescripted as a liberation that can never be redeemed. It must be perpetually renewed. The dialectics of restoration, revolution, restoration is the very logic of settler colonialism, as both their structure and an event of the inflection of the present makes possible settler methods continual reproduction through a variety of literal and figurative debt relations. And the flux and flow of logistical imperialism allows the U.S. to touch South Korea without being touched. This is embodied in the U.S.-South Korean Status of Forces Agreement that scripts U.S. military violence and occupation as the gift of freedom that causes slow violence. That's Biden 15. Militarized that military realizes that it's not an even affective exchange affiliated with freedom vis-a-vis U.S. military occupation on the Korean Peninsula contingent upon, and then it's an obligation embodied in the U.S. KSFA. Militarized security is a non-negotiable measure related to the protection of disposable spaces that embodies consequences range from dumping agent origin displacement or to normalize sexual violence by U.S. losses to unresolved grief silence when raised restless fears. The militarization of change was not inspired by wedded to a broader arc of cultural desires, imperial impulses, structural dynamics, capability to a contemporary Kyrie and diaspora. Militarized that emphasizes the disposability, violent freedom, and neoliberal humanitarianism link the migration experience to radically different subjects. The logistics saturates the academy with benevolent images of openness, all to shroud its necropolitical exuberances in the rivers of blood necessary to contain its coherence, to sustain its coherence. The grid of logistics exceeds the mere circulation of goods as its imperatives for resilience now claim control over the very sustenance of livelihood, pinpointing and annihilating all operations who threaten to unravel the system as such. That's Feldman in 17. Containerization escalates the sovereignty of the warfront. Executive power as a delimitable entity is open to question to transnationalized economies are offshoring themselves to identify their predatory practices, decentralizing containerization of violence beyond the letter of the law, but also to the foreclosure of public accountability. Governmentality resides in archival control over the operation of their visible presentation, timing, and space compare all the precarious border maintains the state sovereign power replicates itself through the border spills. The homeland has become mobile frontiers with the security checkpoints drone surveillance mandate out of bodies of asylum seekers and African American citizens. Their responsive battery of mobilization, murders, and bureaucratic. The border no longer contains, it expands and inflates and consumes bodies. The bodies of Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Freddie Gray, Milano Castillo become border zone for the extended racialized power. Bodies of color are fabricated as frontiers upon which racialized state powers based containerization addresses how an organ of balance the border orbitally separate itself from an originating procedural war and becomes self-organizing as ever shifting points towards an insular zone of anesthesia war itself is camouflaged and perceptually experienced as outsourced. And how do we live and plan for the day that will never come? The one easy navigates the loophole between hope and resignation. Anti-black militarism abroad reverberates in protests here and insurgencies here, forced confrontation with militarism out there. Texas affirms these global linkages as a reduction of the mutual defense pact with South Korea. Instead of viewing IR as a collection of nation states to be exploited at the whims of empire, endorsed mutual indebtedness. That's Moden in 94. Running King's place within a narrative of singularity and difference, rich and horrific in the material effects, not only to the specific of American rights, but in the broader context of globalization and putting into play the labor by multinational capital trajectories of convergence, often vanished and individuation. They are surrounded to give it over to either the realm of the inexplicable arbitrary, sabotage, political, or to a range of explanation and powers because they're idiomatic isolation each from the other. What must be done is to work for the idiomatic differences of the law of singularity, which constitutes those differences which allow the constitution of the event, signification, and reading, rigor, and deliberation are required if we are to address particularity. This event take advantage of political and intellectual spaces that opens demands and opens the possibility of an understanding and organization of totality, not only in the convergence of the forces, structure, and effects of racism and capital, not only in the gathering of white working class refugees and descendants, white Southern refugees, and their descendants, those who have escaped the U.S. sponsored terror in South Korea, only to find its domestic manifestation in the U.S., but also think about what happened and to keep it from happening again and again. This means a real disciplinarity within which totality might actually be engaged to inhabit the anachrony of the improvisational ensemble rather than the time of the caesura. The way that we discuss the resolution matters. Logistics have infiltrated every level of social production, and it seeks to make debate rounds into nodes in the production line of policymaking and research. As ubiquitous as the system is, it is always vulnerable to the system glitch. Neural firings that were never supposed to happen. That's Bellerin 17. The cognitive linguistic have entered directly into capital servitude. This overlaps with the violation of the slave trade. The political has been lost in a world characterized by algorithmic governance. Capital reduces discourse of production to the machine inequality sedimented into machines operationalized and injustice to producing reproducing terror culture founded upon racism and social asymmetry of computation sociality is posited then programmed as a series of accumulation strategies operating through everyday conscious thought and feeling are rendered quantifiable, computable, and programmable. However, capture is not without emancipatory potential from the ways the oppressive link domination of persistent limited code or excessively worth code at both the macro and macro levels of struggle and organization. No existing political discourse can approach this arise because current concepts and thought is fully circumscribed by a fully functionalized by and into the matrix of information and financialization of everyday life. Everyone is forced to continuously throw up information in order to manage volatility and risk over coding bodies and practices of political energy by accumulation. Politics and policy are today always on the side of the state and the state of capital. The alliances operate by techno-orientalist tropes that undergird the Western ordering of the world and are the foundation of security culture. Naturalization of racialized individuation through discourse of control causes pervasive Orientalism and global violence. That's Mathurin 18. Intellectual ignoring with regard to contribution to the global south and urging weapons control erasure is reinforced by decline understanding for Hiroshima and like theories. Yes, say circulation of the civilizational discourse positing a dangerous dynamic of difference between the West and the rest of techno racism, bring attention to racial and technological consideration and armed control deployment of techno racial discourses reinforced with racial reductionism. Growing intensity can generate destructive violence differences are to contain with the emergence of territorial bound and sovereign safety and assistance on order generates conflict of arguing of others as imperial managerial exercise compound the problem by the failure to account for the injuries suffered as a result of violent colonial imperialism. Such propaganda exercises are often measures prior to the outbreak of actual war. This othering takes place through techno-racial stereotyping, portraits of the enemy are sketched through gross reductionism, strategic orientalism, constitutive foundation of Western security culture, premise on the belief that the West has a special role in security affairs based on a reading of political strategic objectives informed by Western views and prejudice, rooted fears of the hacking agent hordes and their ability to industrialize and develop sophisticated weapons, reinforce concerns about the rising East imagining agents and hyper-technological terms and cultural protections of political discourse, techno-orientalism driven by imperial aspirations and appetites of consumers, societies infused with languages and codes with reinscribed racial tropes and stereotypes. U.S. techno-orientalist imagination has roots in the view of the Asian body as a form of expendable technology, that the scope of techno-orientalism is expansive and bidirectional. The structure of our scholarship is locked into racist gatekeeping built upon a norm against noticing white racism. The academy systematically silences scholarship outside the domain of Western IR and claims that self-reflexivity only produce abstraction that elides material focus. That's Henderson and 13. So Charles Diverse and IR contrast with the racist scholarship survey revealed only one article with the radiation method allows IR to whitewash historical content, especially violence, genocide, and theft, facilitates abstraction, because that's theory building rather than historical analysis, simultaneously rationalizes analyze details of discipline, brackets the land and violence, like over to racism as discipline as taboo and labeled students as lacking intellectual rigorous grace has been given the status of silence norm against noticing why racism perpetuates racism, just embedded in foundation where they serve as prior studies have ignored how racism informed realism and liberalism through empirical, ethical, and epistemological assumptions that undergird paradigms and determine our view of what we study and how privileging experiences superior peoples that reinforce the racist dualism, same review of the perpetuity of our check racist assumption begs fuller expression of how assumptions that underlie prominent theses in IR. These racist assumptions that form IR are the primary theoretical contracts of the state and nature, the social contract and anarchy. The modern logistics unites financial creditor debtor schemes with a drive to total access to logistics through the Atlantic slave trade and colonization that attempted to containerize African and indigenous bodies as commodities to produce imperial man. That's Harney et al. In 18. Modern logistics and commercial logistics with all the sources that feed racial capitalism and can be traced to the Atlantic slave trade, the first global movement of vast commodities. We know how much contemporary finance and logistics are entwined into the overlapping global shipping industry, but that was true of the Atlantic slave trade too. Modern logistics bring finance and logistics together in a double alliance over the commodity that really could be under common threat to the individuation of modern man emerging at the same time. Modern logistics is not just about how to transport large amounts of commodities, information, or entry, but also the demand for access, nearly complete access upon the African enslaved the African continent, the lands, and indigenous peoples that was plantation. This kind of access remains the ambition of logistics today. Abolition requires the abolishment of logistics, which and its most created people without standing anywhere aggregated across access allows for the most equal calculations about the perishability of the plan, obsolescence, the cost of replacement logistics choices because it assumes fugitivity are entangled on a common rubber substance logistics to account for what those missing logistics will always be the science of being white. This hellfire was also first logisticality amongst those who found each other under the rest of almost all access, but in the grip of each other, will right something happened to us. And the whole harmony speaks of the fugitivity of the people in Africa as living by a principle of individual incompleteness. People who came into existence without origin, who were in touch, whose response to the demand for access was a radical opening of being a practice of hapticality. This absent fever of individuation. This hapticality was never going to be fully enslaved, survives on the base and as the basis of the Black radical tradition and radical social poesis. In as blackness, it is necessary to place what that hapticality against what sharp white call is what their pervasive anti-black race that this founding of modern logistics bequeath the world.
You good?
Mm-hmm.
Okie dokie. Sociality. I'm not really sure what that means. So, what is sociality?
Yeah, so there are a couple cards that indicate what exactly this is. First is the Moten 94 Solvency Advocate that we read that talks about how sociality is a finding of the different social energies that link us not only in terms of our different
Ooh, hold
experiences, but
on.
in terms of the political direction of.
I'm not trying to cut you off. I just missed the word you said. Um, Moten says how you said affirming or affining.
So we think that sociality is the condition of being held together within modernity. The Harney card talks about how the modernity formed through the logistical practice of the transatlantic slave trade, founded a condition where we are all brought into contact with each other. We think that logistics transforms that social capacity into a tool of capitalism, racism, and gendered and sexualized violence.
Okay.
We think that
Can
the
I
running
ask you
through the
another question? What's so is it that like all logistics are bad or just the logistics like the
I think there's a
logistics behind
distinct
the transatlantic slave trade?
So I think there's a distinction that Harney makes between logisticality and logistics. Logisticality is the moment of being brought together, that social capacity. We think that logistics, as the directing of that social
Hold on.
capacity,
What do you mean? What do you mean the moment of being brought together in social capacity?
so Harney makes an argument that there is a social capacity created by how the world has been brought together through modernity. We think that produces what Harney calls logisticality, which is just kind of abstractly the capacity for sociality to exist. We think that the way in which logistics operates is it takes that social capacity and directs it towards violent modes of production of capital. We think that hapticality is.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So sociality or logisticality, the moment we've all been brought together in a social capacity, but logistics is when that's weaponized violently, right?
Yes.
Okay, for sure. Does that happen every time logistics is applied?
We think that
No. Okay,
so
why not?
it depends upon the definition of what you're talking about. We think that
Hold on. I mean, your
logisticality.
definition of logistics. Because you said logistics is what happens when
Right, but
logisticality
I
gets
guess it
weaponized.
depends upon what you mean by logistics. If you're talking about our definition of
Okay, so
logistics
what
that I
what do
just
you
gave
mean by
about the redirection
logistics?
of that towards producing capital through violently imposing things like policy, then yes, we would argue that that is violent. We think that logisticality is not necessarily violent and provides an attempt to reroute that social energy towards producing an ethic of care, i.e.,
Okay,
practicality.
so that ethic of care, it like at a very basic level for the people watching, it seems like the AF is just let's be nicer to each other, and the AF cultivates that. Is
Well, I
there
don't
more
think
to
it's
the
just
AF?
let's be nicer to each other. I think that the Harney and Moten evidence is pretty clear that it provides an ethos that gives a direction to our politics without locating it in a particular telos that can be commodified by logistics.
Okay.
All right. It'll be 2 off in case. I'll send it out now. All right, I sent it. I'm going to set up a timer. Is there anybody who's not ready or has not received it? I'm sorry, I'm sending my girlfriend the live stream link. Okay. All right, I'm gonna start. First off, of interpretation violates the alliance commitments or formalized treaties. Any extra legal action doesn't mean single and small 66 alliance commitments variable. We will summarize procedure. We coded treaties into 3 classes: defense, pact on neutrality, pact on policy, only alliances and formal written treaties, convention agreements were included. We have found the written alliance has been meaningful, rarely entered into lightly excluded or security arrangements and unilateral guarantees such as American protection under 12 alliance is met our criteria and substantially limited means immediate and material, not hypothetical or potential. O'Connor in 99. We concluded to be evaluated in hypothetical state as impermissible because it potentially limits appears in the present form where we think that language is read as requiring presently, not potentially or hypothetically limited to demonstrate only where limits not where it might, could, would be if limiting measures were not taken under which refers to legal documents. Course 97. It refers to a legal document the class under which affords the view the use of under rather than with or through suggest Congress meant a formal document that can define operation rather than a routine with which by means of and conduct an operation under which it is clear unambiguous under which encompasses legal documents are impacted stability. There are 2 internal links. First is limit to bend topic serves a predictable state of point for debate that guarantees thematic coherence absent defined limits debates competitive intent to create the race and margin that distort topic research. 2 is ground of predefined controversy ensures a vibrant debates and in-depth clash, but it's unreasonable to prepare for the alternative frameworks with the ground allocated to us by the parameters of the resolution. All 2AC defense of this claim will rely on concessionary ground which is in stable basis for a year of debate, and debate is valuable because it iteratively teaches the skill of persuasive organizing relationality through face-to-face dialogue over what is at stake and how to solve it. It is the foundation of successful movement organizing, which outweighs in turn the but Stony in 19. Or to the third spiral, the tradition of revolutionaries and less organized and parliamentary. It's nothing organizing is not embarrassed about power to wield it. You need to persuade people to join the cause and begin organizing crisis result. There's no guide for the aftermath. No education it will bring the revolution. There are people in the stubborn particularities. It's up to you to figure out how to act together, find common ground or not. The civil rights organizing came for the reason Mississippi for not wanting to vote. We were not fighting Jim Crow. The campaigns were similar. People told you they weren't going to do something with a good reason. You tried to convince them. Your job was to find out what people wanted to be different. The tactics to persuade people they matter. Reorganizing requires you to learn the language of politics so well that it becomes your own. It takes practice. You feel unsure. This lays out the question: what is at stake? What will it take? What will you do? Exercise are useful, but they can be stiff because you're not speaking politics or translating. Eventually, you leave this scaffolding behind you. You speak as yourself. You have to speak as a different version of yourself. Be comfortable with the antagonism, disagreement. I've role-played conversation I feared most before having them after I replayed them over and over. Organizing the day-to-day work that prepares dramatic action. The entire problem is piece by piece. Relationship can be utopian at the best they offer in intimacy outside of romance or family. These serve as a source of support that people can't maybe comrades, but reach beyond people already on your side and do it over others. You can't assume people organize to share your values. Assume they don't. To organizing so it opens up safe for relationship. It's not in the class and race and gender disappear, but the need to work together to achieve a shared end to provide commonality to relate across common difference to figure out how one of ones are a cultural challenge your expectations outside of categories. You build trust not by affirming the shared practice by coming to understand what brought someone else into it. Disad, Soko Japan's relationship for trending out the plan crushes him clear in 12. In recent years, driven among by common concerns, Seoul and Tokyo have been taking preliminary steps to advance relations by military exercise and trilateral participation. Washington is new, urging out both allies to strengthen military cooperation. Washington needs to walk a fine line neither appear and to take side can be assisted by maintaining strong alliance with both as a means of allaying each other's countries' concerns about the other in global warfare. Worth 15. South Korea and Japan ties remain tenuous with strong dispute over Dakota over the background of the battle climate. The Shimane government asserted claimed as near miss at armed conflict in response to President Rose and Coast Guard vessels in a plane where was a mere saber rattling would have used force case. Presumption A, vote negative. They have met their word of proof. Their evidence from 1994 already described languages that exist have already performed the 1A seats of the ballot isn't key. They're neither an inherent nor solvent. B, this uniquely turned case symbolic, affirming their method despite its lack of highest material resistance, strength, and power. Regardless, in Law 9. Every dissertation failed to tell us more than we already know and ignores material condition powerless learned how to accumulate futility and entrapment, arguing against deliberating resistance that failed to alter broader power relation to material conditions, recognizing the existence of powerful grids accounts of everyday resistance do not differentiate between practices that reproduce and alter power might involve pressing the power to become more adept at the domination or dominate differently or preclude alternative acts that would challenge it. Is necessary to do more than speak to power. It must be demonstrated that the acts will adapt to broader changes, resistance, provoking refinement of practices, and confronts whose analysis ends with the production of non-compliance help power to work better. And logistics have not infiltrated every social production. Beller's argument about algorithmic governance is wrong. Barkland in 21. Proponents emphasize ruptures wrought by datification and new modes of governance, reconceptualization of humanity under a technological entwinement, critical anti-capitalist perspective, united to highlight universal transformation brought about by the tech change. One of the pitfalls of these fertilizing perspectives is the neglect of the particular nodal spheres move at the same pace when exposed to tech datification and uneven impacts on different fields. A gap exists between big tech and politics. Not all fields are conducive to digital infrastructure diversified to not necessarily threaten epistemic practice. Transformative potential depends on the value and dominant actors. Integration has been a slow adaptation, not revolution, totalizing claims and attention grabbing, but does not measure up against the actual way technological innovations are instituted within different fields. Processes are mediated through specific logic of a given field. Comparative empirical research will be needed across different areas. And the F is a naive fantasy. Logistical preparation is key to revolutionary activities and sustainable alternative social arrangements. Sean's in 14. Social resistance has reached a certain impasse of movements to create a range of and crisis to rise while organizing occurs around narrow issues, alternative public exposed having emerged spontaneously as to say this implies that society holds seed of its own downfall, which simply needs sprout, but there will be a struggle as power holders do anything to retain their role. Insurrection and the seeks part to tried or prefigurative one that seeks to inspire people by showing them a better way in small scale alternatives both are ill suited to aggressively attack active and well resourced religious movement based approaches are not sufficient, and many who join movements do so to win tangible gains rather than adhere to the general principle. There must be a clear functional solution to central research movements from Black Panthers to through worker-centered anarchist initiative. Preparation is key. There must be a material capacity skills to achieve victories. We need to be realistic. People must see results. They have the reason to believe that their own organization will improve. Live insurrection implies armed struggle would prove theta relief through our movements need to develop an organized basis of logistical support that can mobilize support and sustain revolutionary struggle rather than dissipate in cathartic insurrection. Significant examples come from indigenous land reclamation, blockades, coordinated work, and venues bring together organized logistical can to displace a state and capital rather than merely impose insurrection without preparation. It's mere fantasy, and their understanding of bad debt is nebulous and self-defeating. Heaney and 17. Hardy notion of mutual elaboration of debt takes place where their undercutters mean to elaborate their debt without credit. What an informal phase is not a site of study. Despite regimes of credit planning launched from anywhere, any kitchen, any back porch, hall, improvised party is a continuous experiment. The university is a place where study is by no means of the university, and study one can lose track of this is necessary. We forget our debts. The whole point is to lose track of them. The undercommons organize around problems. However, they do not articulate a position. They just keep on problematizing, always extending any declaration of interest. And radical struggles against exploitative debt relations are only effective when mobilized via collective, concrete, utopian demands for change. Wozniak and 17. I cast them out of the need for refusal, but I ask if there's sufficient that these are implied rather than the explicit demand. The general call for refusal need to be situated in particular context. Appeals better facilitate contestation against debt if articulated and produced through a demand. Demands emerge from, inform, and change perspective. They create moments for collective teaching and learning in which critical analysis of the present is heightened and different imaginaries of the future are engendered. They play a crucial role in influencing subjectivity. Utopian demands alter socio-political landscapes and note the difference between abstract and concrete. Utopian demand abstract utopias are conjured up without sufficient regard to the present condition that could render them possible. Concrete utopias have already developed in society. Does not ignore the present. It must be cognizant of present potential that might or might not produce different futures. Utopian demands promote disinvestment in the status quo. On the other hand, they are a mode of affirmation. They function as provocation towards alternatives. The latter function is to redirect action and energy toward an open future. Demand that animates political desires, toward imagination, and serve as model to mobilize and organize movements. There is no to the present, and not only opens up the possibility of a yes to a different future, it is altered by its relationship to that yes, and the effective distancing of the status quo that might be enabled is different when paired with an attachment to a potential alternative. It is a combination that packs the punch. To function optimally, a utopian demand should be grounded in actual existing tendency. Disqualified with escapism or wishful thinking. Utopian demands for a debt autonomy creates a freedom of a debt of life distance from debt of reality, allows us to see a new light. Demands for a debt autonomy only asserts its performative force with efficacy if it is collective, and specific technocratic reform is the best way to combat imperialism. Brian 12. We need to answer the question of military logistics. What things is the opposing war machine relies on? I've heard of complete indifference to military logistics. The entire point is to map the supply lines, so your social strategy seems to be an ideological chief. There have been bang on critiques of the state of war machine without things changing too much. The critique fails to reach the people if it's expressed in foreign language of academics. There are other causes or factors, not discouraged proposition or semiotic. It's a combination. I do not reject your claims, but wonder how we get there. The changing a social order without involves intervening in the material networks. The hardest thing requires that activists be something more than a critic. And their app is an over-intellectualized approach to real and material issues faced by Black people. Web in 18. It is easy to be seduced by the undercommons. Embodying it is difficult. Being within and against university is impossible to sustain a romantic notion, but refusing excellence will cost you your job. How does one live in it? Networks are short-lived. Meetings with structure, order, offer time out when one returns to work, but this notion is highly problematic. The fundamental question where you dig and how to identify utopian find are never adequately addressed. To study in military arrhythmia are slipping concept evaded a concrete material reference. We need more than poetry. How do we do not resist a new world into being. The university cannot be the site of transformative utopian politics. It cannot even be the starting point for this. Within the university, movements will be soon co-opted, will soon be co-opted and neutralized. Institutional habits weigh so heavily that projects will be scarred from the outset by a colonizing imagery of education. The university is but one space of learning. Creating radical experimental space needs to shift out toward operating and outside of movements function as lab for alternative relationship beyond the academy and ethical and political responsibility to provide theoretical analysis to help forge a utopian imaginary, putting knowledge and resources to use in the service of a collaborative process to generate a utopian vision that can help you and can help inform and mobilize long-term collective action for systemic change. And researching and debating IR teaches critical inquiry that is externally valuable. It's not inherently followed. Edinger and 20. The first benefit of pipeline of future IR scholarly practitioners, scholars, and practitioners of our undergraduates revision field from within IR scholars take direct interest in students in everyday schooling practice, preoccupation, political practice, misleads. Professoriate students can be ignored as has led the IR professoriate to be undervalued. Training of generation IR education provides conceptual architecture needed to make decision classroom where IR theory gets reproduced for the first time to future generation of IR scholars. Plant the seeds. Contribution. Mark the card contribution. Hold on, I need a moment to get something to drink.
Okay.
All right, let me set up a timer. All right, I'm good.
Okay. This web card that you read says beyond the academy and ethical and political responsibility to provide theoretical analysis to forge a utopian imaginary means putting knowledge and resources to use in the service of a collaborative process to generate utopian vision that can inform, guide, and mobilize long-term collective action for systemic change. What part of that is logistics?
We don't wait. I don't understand. We don't defend logistics necessarily. It's just a question of whether this sort of discussion should happen outside of the academy.
Why is this a
Well,
disadvantage?
it's a disadvantage to the app because you're couching the language of the affirmative in academic language, and you're doing it within an academic space.
What is
the argument is to
academic
be
language?
We just think that like use of like abstract sociological concepts that aren't explained in a way that would be accessible to like a broader audience are bad.
You've used utopia a lot. What is utopia?
Just like a end goal without a means to get there that's realistically applied to a group of people who want to access it, kind of.
An end goal without a material means to access it. Why doesn't that double turn with all of your arguments about how we need to have things that are tied to material accessibility? That we can't have these abstract notions that are never
that's the way I just explained it. It's that you don't provide a material means by which to get to the utopia. We defend the material means.
Good. You've defended utopia good as a goal of organizing, but that's fine.
No, it's that organizing's end goal has to have a material means to get there. We obviously defend that.
The disadvantage, it says that South Korea and Japan relations are trending upwards now. Why would the U.S. Withdrawing of its alliance commitments with South Korea prevent those relations?
Thomas would like to take the question.
Yeah, that uniqueness card also says that Washington is key to make sure that those relations continue upward and don't go downward.
Why?
The card says that Washington has to walk a fine line to remain as allies with both sides.
Well, it says that neither appearing to take sides.
Washington has to do that. So the way to not appear to take sides is to stay in both defensive acts.
I guess what warrant do you have for why war would occur absent the U.S., considering your worth card from 2015 assumes U.S. presence in both countries?
We'll probably read newer evidence in the block if we were to go for this, but we think that tensions have actually increased as a result of the trade war between South Korea and Japan. There are numerous factors that have contributed to this trade war related to like technological precious metals and finished technological products, but particularly like problems with the Comfort Women Agreement and like further tensions over like economic stressors produced by COVID.
Debatability is the ability to debate the act, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Why does the act prevent debate?
Our argument is related to the ground and limits claim. One, we need a predictable topic by which to base our pre-round preparation. Sorry, can you say that again?
What ground could you not read?
I think Thomas could better answer this question.
Yeah, all ground related to the federal government reduces conditions for Defense Pact activation, and that's outlined by our interpreter definition cards.
Handini prep. 10 minutes.
Okay, I'm done. I'll send it out.
I had 8:36 left on my timer.
Should be sent. Let me find my Zoom. Does everyone have the choice? Are we waiting on a judge? Cool. Thumbs up. Yeah, I'll wait for Trip.
Did you say the order? My fault.
Oh no, I probably missed it. Case, T, and then the display. I will start in 10 seconds if no one interrupts me. Cool. Vote affirmative to embrace planned failures and means of refusing the resolution logistical expansion that breaks the apocalyptic fear of destabilization. U.S. power that secures its power aligns with illicit moments of disassembly that interrupt the rhythm of the production line through moving in all the wrong ways. Exemplified MAGA reiterations to dissent, transnational affective solidarity, such as safe judging now, creating half the indebtedness, an ethic of care that resists U.S. debt imperial violence in the face of logistics and driving force that shapes research practice, shift the debate to crafting strategies and sociality as opposed to prescriptive instrumental solutions, and motivating together creates moments of care that rails against death even when death is inevitable. One and see one presumption. One, reject presumptions and arbitrary form of gatekeeping based on an antiquated binarized view of materiality and activism that requires logistical evaluation to deem the one see sufficient in need of doing more, which is logistical materialization. Two, research is material and solves all their arguments about it is not new. The negative has conceded every example of the act to prove the one sees ethic as solves and can be mobilized towards material practice for resistance and disrupt the imperial supply chain through collective disassembly. Three, they have generated uniqueness for us. Ballots, wins, competition are not neutral but operate as a neural rewiring through the minds of debaters. The code works us and we work the code, which means you should both understand your ballot as a rupture debates traditional research paradigm and refuse to align your cognitive labor with racist tropes in the status quo. The next argument about how we should understand to organize and material power. This is also links to our arguments above about the differentiation between what is material and not. Argument is that we should not understand debate as spilling out, but spilling in. How our research affects those material productions that are able to create and create linkages that are abroad and amongst us in our relation to each other. The Markland evidence, it's just that there's no link or no link argument. The evidence talks about how there's totalizing claims of technology and abusing the site to use one of them is bad. There's not the one you see. We made a difference between logistics and logicality. Those one you see cross-sects. Logisticality can be used to disrupt the logistics of the status quo. The chance evidence is nonsensical. It says that logistical preparation is needed in order to consolidate movements in the status quo as well as then bring together. That is not logistics. Logistics is that which seeks to individuate us, that seeks to pull us apart in favor of an end goal and end telos. Our argument is that instead we should evaluate the process of organizing that comes together in the status quo. Their Heaney evidence, its conclusion goes neg, explicitly answers Webb's university arguments as well, and they're terrible, and it's a terrible argument. Heaney and 17. University will be a place of refuge and study can be developed in the other comments of the university to confront such regimes of credit accounting and governance. Process of decommodification are long-term embedded in everyday practices. Elaboration of review and data so that affect imbued practices study would require. The Wozniak evidence says, quote, collective and concrete utopias are necessary. This is our argument that we should and we ought to create those concrete arguments, concrete assemblages in the status quo, but it's only through collective mobilization. Logistics fractures that, otherwise the alternative cannot solve, or that the app is a prerequisite. The Shantz evidence is closer to the app, and a double turn with framework refutes governability in relation to dominant institutions because it reinstates violent neoliberalism while foreclosing the possibility of sociality. Shantz. And 14. The emphasis on leads, experts, and professionals and administrative bureaucracies discouraging from asserting their own capacities and decision-making. This also form of governance regulation, neoliberal political regimes that leaves people unprepared to save freedom when opportunities arise. Once people see the structures are unable to meet the basic needs and alternatives become available to struggle to break the structures, anarchist ideas, and practices important of moving beyond survival with the current concepts. Members of non-elite groups and need opportunities to change interpersonal economic interactions. These practices are all part of the process that revolutionize how we relate to each other. Permanent autonomous zones or the socialists of Europe's in 1920s or 30s referred to dual power. The Bryant evidence they've cut out of the context. It's about literal roads and transport bureaus, not policymaking or militarism abroad. One see Brian 12. Why I'm baffled by what politics of ontology should entail, what politics is your chemistry based on, or what is society or non-humans, resources, technologies, or infrastructures are causal factors in the status quo. The Webb evidence, the undercommons is not a place, but a mode of relating to each other. They attempt to clearly identify the spatial condition of the undercommons indicative of logistical approach to social relations that operates through containment and control, precluding communities of care. 2, return the resistance offense, embracing the app, it ruptures the reactionary politics that they created. 3, the undercommons is never limited to the university and the status quo. The last argument by IR, we have not rejected IR as a totalizing vision, but rather the assumptions and priors that use in IR to characterize the world as one of anarchy, which the app doesn't do, nor does the app say that IR is precluded to the social. We've actually said that we should be linked with global linkages that change things outside of the United States, which means there's no link to their offense framework. 1, debate exceeds the game, insulated from logistics and produces racialized demand for access, but a space sutured by racial capitalism maintains unethical protocols. A level committee refused to prioritize procedurals can be divorced from militarization of debate. Its legacy of framework like debate is inevitable, which treats debate should be not one of models, but a scholarship to counter tradition. The one sees must limit the conditions to activate the U.S. defense pact of NATO member states, the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, under the model. The negative gets to prove the resolution is false, but the neg or the AF can win the reasons the neg scholarship is racist and other criticisms of epistemology. They get any topic dissets or state good counterpoints over the breadth. There's not a net benefit to quantity of arguments. Harney at moment 15. When the cultant cannot demonstrate access policy comes to diagnose what is blocking access, law becomes a problem with law of the self-defense of inaccessible policy prescribed to oppose the democratic deposition, the imposition of policy and final possibilities, the imposition of the wrong, which are where wrong, where there always the wrong to incomplete system revision study happens to don't stop and not about the disagreement proof the capital sufficient the purpose is not the end of the connection. The consultant cannot win black life, cannot uncover real life, cannot expose founders planning around the kitchen table when democratic deposition fails. Simple depotism in the name of democracy must be imposed with resilience in the name of violent tradition and things won't be flexible and compliant. Just assembly is incomplete as much more than complete can be individuated. 3 decides to their model. 1, the individuation decides their focus on international source with the presumption that violence out there. That means we can never understand the violence in here, which is the only way to transfer our investments to level rationality, which means our model, the prerequisite to all their technical literacy offense or organization offense, their skills are a prior to the de-animation of personal relationships in favor of institutional analysis, which ensures us spot advocates who see people as blips on the graph as opposed to human beings, which internally turns a card that they've read. B, logistics said their calls for iteration and the perfection of clashes and trends good, provided through the increased access control over the argumentations, logistics, or counter-intervention allows debates on the topic, but refuses the drive to maximize debate. The impact of logistical governance, the drive to identify and remove blackages in the name of improvement, more black and brown care as lacking value, it destroys community because it ensures touch and filter through logistical improvement. 3, you should refuse the calls to inclusion like the TVA or suicide because the impact of logistical governance, the drive to identify and remove blockages in the name of improvement, marks black and brown care as lacking value or purpose. 3 is the judgment decide their model and suicide debate transits to embody American conceptuals, Green and Hicks 2 and 5. Debating both sides, groups want to appreciate the process of debate. Democratic decision making articulates debate to the Cold War liberal discourse, American exceptionalism. Debating both sides works alongside class opportunity associated with the efforts to delegitimize the process. Judgment debate reinvents itself in the game and instills ethical attributes that deliberative democracy by recoding debate by both sides as necessary to the moral development of students. 4, fairness is just an interlink. If we win our research model, the best way to generate anti-logistical politics and vote app. Any picture we're winning to their vision of the game, writ large applies to fairness because the reason it matters is it sustains the game. 5, if they go for a true testing argument, it's arbitrary. Olympic shapes all their falsifiability games. 6, debate is a site of ideological warfare that regulates who can participate. A vision that adds black participants and stirs supercultural multiculturalism that intensifies racial terror. That's mode. And 7 is form versus content. The TVA is a floor, not a ceiling, accommodating non-normative scholarship as long as we hit certain checkmarks and sustain gaslighting. The gate keeps Irish scholarship writ large. That's a mode evidence. In the last card they've read, it actually flows app because it says the end point of debate is not one of clash for clash sake, but rather one for relationality, which means if we want to interlink or link to one of our dissets, it interlink turns their ability to access scholarship that is able to bring people together and organize. 6, and the last argument I will make is that fiat is not intrinsic to any of that organization. What about fiat or understanding that the government has as a plan teaches you where to organize, how to organize, or when to come together? Only our interpretation does so because it prioritizes the agents within the resolution rather than one that is externalized from ourselves, impacted by the individuation. Dissent above. Dissent. One case outweighs. The past year has shown a one-to-one relationship between securitizing Asian countries and fiscal assaults on innovations. You cannot disconnect the arcs they go for the method of persuasion. Impacts in here matter more than impacts out there. Racialized tropes become programmed into social relations with the code. This evidence your ballot cannot solve any of the dissents, but it does affect subjectivity to Orientalism dissent terms. You should cross-apply the math or evidence. Their fear of conflict uniquely is dangerous and rooted in techno-Orientalist tropes in East Asia, disguised by seemingly objective language that inflates risk. It's a broader critique of viewing Asia as chaotic and unstable that causes violence. A link doesn't mean be skeptical of the dissent. Zero's link. You should presume colonial scholarship false on face. You should independently reject the team because it is the only deterrent. 3, if they want to link, you evaluate the dissent in the world of the app, which solves the impact. Norton, that's with 18. Friendship helps us to reinforce relations that can see but those that constitute dynamism with the self and other, bringing friendship at the parity of the grapple of something lost in the focus of enmity, conflict, war, different from the discussion of the agreement alliances based on the ontology of things that cast a friendship out to each them, relational ontology being other possibilities of self and selfness, reopen the possibility for a friendship away conceptually of self and other rather than self in contrast to the other. 6, you should reject. Util debate has trained us all to conflate consequentialism as a moral frame. Util, logic, anti-black, slavery, colonization, prison, industrial conflicts were all justified by white being and maximizing the greater good. It's not zero logic to prioritize ongoing suffering over future threats. The inverse is true. They've justified the continued bloodshed to white future generations. Parents a literal white supremacist slogan to secure a future for white children. It's a terrible model for IR. Think of the 1% risk of WMDs killed 3 million. Domino theory led to 10 million deaths in Vietnam. To secure the LIO, racial capitalism kills 10 million a year due to hunger alone. We don't need to win. Util is always bad, but just in this instance, you should probably ethics because of all our dissents above. 9, you should reject, or 6, you should reject the dissents understanding by IR. Their predictions of East Asian conflict assume that states act in their own self-interest and is an inherently anarchic world. Or Henderson evidence, impact turn systems says they're IR ignores how blackness and colonialism lay the foundation, results in a white man's burden to save the world from anarchy that results in mass amounts of colonialism, anti-black violence across the globe. Next is the paternalism dissent. The logic of the 1EC assumes that the US must be the key internal link that tells both countries to play nice to serving as the father figure. And lastly, the app is definitely not individual, reformulates international relations as well as the one to South Korea through mutual defense. We should be connected. We should not abandon them, but it should not be through the mutual defense treaty.
Okay, you good?
Yeah.
Great. On T, can you repeat the counter interp?
Yeah, for sure. The counter interpretation is that the 1AC must limit the conditions that activate the US defense pacts with NATO member states, the Philippines, South Korea, and or Japan. The explanation of that counter interpretation was that the model the negative gets to prove that the resolution is false. You get disads, counterplans to the resolution. The act can win the reasons.
Okay.
The negative
Can I?
scholarship is
So I wanted to ask
a
a follow-up. How does the 1AC limit conditions for defense pact activation?
The 1AC says that mutual organizations of care, linkages, global linkages are established in order to reduce the conditions in which the mutual defense treaty is activated.
So who are the linkages established between?
There's not one actor, i.e. we've impact turned the focus on.
Yeah, I understand that. So I know it's not one actor. I'm asking, so is it like the people in this round?
No, we've prescribed a method for what linkages as well outside of debate and global linkages ought to do in order to constitute the reduction.
So how does a linkage between like me and somebody in Burma, how does that reduce conditions for
you assume
South Korea?
That it's individual. That's our whole point. That linkages are not between individuals, but they're between groups of people.
Okay,
that come
so
together.
me and my friends and me and the homies in South Korea groups, right? How does that reduce conditions for defense pact activation?
Yeah. So we've read a host of examples in 1AC and 2AC evidence. Some are MAGO reiterations of dissent, transnational affective solidarities, such as Save Jeju Now, that create the pressure as well as the needs and the impetus to create political change in the status quo. If your argument is that
that makes sense,
solve that.
No, that makes sense. I have more questions. That makes sense. I have more questions. Cool. The first dissad on T is that we are the individuation dissad that we create more violence by reading T.
No, it is the argument that your model of debate stems from one in which the AF understands international rather than the interpersonal. We think that binary is one bad, and instead.
But if it's not about individuals, so we just have to understand the relationship between groups, right?
Not groups, but the different debaters' relationship to scholarship in the SQUO. The 1AC should not just be a referendum on the USFG.
Okay. The logistics dissad is just was it clash? I heard clash bad, but it's of course it's probably more than clash bad.
Yeah, it is not clash bad. It's viewing the maximization of clash as one that needs to be intrinsic good and maximized in all situations is bad. The reason for this and the warrant for this is that in order to answer the counter interpretation, you're gonna be
that works. I just have
linear
impact. No, hold on. That works. What was the third dissad on T? Because I heard
the third dissad was the judgment dissad. The Green and Hicks evidence says that we should not legitimate the process of debate that happens between two individuals or two groups, etc., because it justifies American exceptionalism in which certain instances USFG has legitimacy to act in certain ways. Instead, we should deplatform the agent as a whole.
Okay, that was time. Thank you. 10 minutes. Go ahead and start it. I stopped it at 227. There's no cards, but it's a Zoom debate, so you know what the vibe is. I sent my feelings. I think that's the right one. Yeah, it is. Order is T. And that's it. YOLO. You know the vibes. I'll give everybody a second to get all settled. Or y'all already settled. Maybe twiddle your thumbs. I don't know. Whatever you want to take a second for, take your second. Let me figure out how to write this. That's better. Is everybody cash money? Great. Begin. Our interpretation is that topical firmness must reduce the United States to our government alliance commits with one of the four countries by at least substantially limiting the conditions under which the defense pact can be activated. They don't mean because they're not an immediate and material reduction in the activation of formalized treaties here. Counter interpretation sounds a lot like our interpretation, but they don't mean because pressure is not actual legal action. I'll also get to that later on the counter interpretation debate. Go to the line by line debate. Is a game period. That this argument needs more explanation. There's a reason why it's rooted in racial capitalism, but it's a game. It's a game nonetheless. The AF does not break out of that system of racial capitalism, even if we understand how groups relate to each other. Because one, they're focused on spill in, which means that nothing outside of the round matters, and they haven't made any arguments about why Michigan RV better understands Texas DW after reading the 1AC. If those arguments are just contingent on the performance of the 1AC and not an actual ballot, you should feel comfortable voting on perception. But second, the argument is that there are other racial capitalism forces that are outside of logisticality, which is why they can't solve. If this debate is not about models, which is what this first argument was, and there's no individuation to that because that's about models. But if the debate is about scholarship, they must win that all scholarship and our interpretation is bad, which I don't think they've risen to that level. That level, the counter interpretation debate, they do not meet their counter interpretation. They do not meet the counter interpretation because we are the only ones who have actually defined those words in the resolution. They are not direct action, even if they have examples of transnational anti-militarism movements. There is no explanation of how those things spill up to change the actual text of the defense pact. Our arguments indicate that it must be legal action. It cannot be actual legal action. But if they try to make an argument that it eventually spills up, that is affects topicality. Affects topicality is bad for two reasons. The first is limits about a topic provides a predictable stasis point which guarantees coherence around the resolution. Given debate's competitive nature, absent a stasis point, F teams would race to the margins, cutting things that are far from topical for the sake of winning, which thus for top research education. Subpoint B is grounded, predefined controversy, and issues of vibrant literature-based and in-depth clash, but it's unreasonable to prepare for alternative frameworks with the ground allocated by the premise of the resolution. All 2AT defense will elicit was a concessionary ground like other case, which they premium in the 2AC and went on in the 2AR. Guess they did spike out of the link to the dissent, and they proved a bidirectionality link when they said that one, the app solves, and two, they make the argument that that the app is not reformed because they're focusing on interpersonal relations, which means that we would still, which like in theory, the alliance commitment, even if it's outside the defense pact, would go up net more at post plan than it would be reduced at the floor level, which means that at a FXT level, they're not topical, and they link to our ground argument. C, and the other argument they made is that there's no net benefits of quantity. Harney net benefits is one run. This is our argument. Isn't that more arguments are better for debates? That's bad characterization. Arguments that testing ideas is important. Those tests have to be offensive and test absolvency. Second, is T isn't a form of democratic despotism, but because we don't seek to exercise absolute control over what the app can and can't do. Rather, we think they get all their offense with the plan text. Third, we agree that revision is never complete with the lack of a stasis point means we can never engage in a process for revision. And in a debate around the app, doesn't revise their ideas or the 1AC after reading of the 1AC. It's up to the next to test the idea sufficiently to force revision, but all the elements in ground offense proves that we can't test that idea to invoke the level of revisions. The individuation just had these. It is. Understanding internationalism, whether focused on international actors or groups that are located in different and transnationally, is inevitable. It's only, but it's inevitable. But we can still, but reading a plan text, you can still focus on how groups relate to one another. You can talk about, you can read, for example, for instance, the Okinawa Athlete Laws allows you to talk about anti-militarism movements and the Ryukyu people in Okinawa and how that's linked up and connected to those in Hawaii, Ecuador, the Marshall Islands, and the Jeju Islands. Second, the ballot is not able to solve this argument, even though they are a different starting point with the affirmative. They have not changed how we understand each other within the round because they're going for the argument that it's the end round that matters. Third, there's no reason why starting at the level of the state precludes a focus on the intrapersonal, which is that we are so able to have good relationships to each other and to our scholarship. The logistics argument doesn't make a lot of sense because we're not saying clash in every instance is good. No, there shouldn't be a both sides debate over whether or not white supremacy is a good idea, whether or not slavery is a good idea. But clash, especially in this instance, is good. I'll do the baddest stony extension here. Debate is a competitive game that at its best can be a proxy to learn the foundations of radical organizing. The point of organizing isn't persuading people that something matters, but that they can do something about it. Most people in debate agree that racial capitalism is bad, and the ones who aren't likely to be persuaded otherwise. Confronting it requires dialoguing with those who agree and organizing them in a feasible and effective manner. Battistoni says that learning to organize means that we must learn the language of politics so well that it becomes our own by asking what is at stake, what will it take to win, and what will we do about it. We must translate our convictions into macro political demands and role play the conversations we fear most before having them, then replay them over and over after. Switching sides on a limited topic over the course of the season teaches us those skills and habits. This is a straight turn to sociology and the habitability arguments, which in the one to see Harney evidence being topical generates it better. Organizing builds intimate relationality and accountability by generating respect for how people can have different perspectives in subject positions, even when they're united around a shared goal. Fairness is key to develop this relationality and debate. The point of debate shouldn't be is the AF correct? Is can the NEC respond in ways that pushes both teams and the judge to learn together? Yes, some level of truth testing is arbitrary, but at a very minimum, we should be able to present solvency processes against the AF versus an affirmative that defends some level of state action. Being willing to lose is the key in to recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that we can better ourselves by respecting those we compete against. A world of non-topical debates makes social linkages much harder. We control uniqueness. Debate is a game played by students who want to win, so every decision we make is guided by the competitive incentive to win at some level. If teams don't think they've lost fairly, they won't work because they won't work through idiomatic differences as for the 1AC moment because they won't respect the other team or their arguments. That calcifies pre-existing ideological commitments and makes it harder to, quote, understand what brought someone else to their position, which Battistoni says is a precondition to mobilizing hapticality for broader societal change. 1AC mode even says, quote, rigor and deliberation are required to open up political and intellectual spaces. So if we win, they discourage that rigor. It means they double turn themselves at the level of form. Imagine what a year of debate looks like under our interpretations. Under theirs, it is this AF versus the same cap or set call or generic Korea pro-lift is said all year. The CEDA positions might change with the AF wins most of the debates because they get to pick what they link to and can prepare more than the NEC. Under our interpretation, the start of the year, the 1AC reads the South Korea after about deterring North Korea loses to logistics K based on the 1AC Kim and Bank evidence. At the next tournament, the AF adapts and reads a new South Korea AF based on the U.S. economic and financial exploitation of debt relationships with South Korea as an advantage for the AF. For the plan, the AF would win that debate. The next tournament, it's the same affirmative, but the NEC has revised their strategy, and the NEC beats them on a critique of starting with the state based on logistic state action. That's the 1AC Bellers and Hardy evidence. At the next tournament, the AF changes the AF to be a critique of IR assumptions with a plan text in the context of North Korea deterrence because they privileged the state starting point and justified the plan to ending their defense commitment. The AF wins. By the end of the year, the literature base has been exhausted in a way that their model doesn't. Now, which one of those scenarios do you think generates hapticality better? Obviously, the latter, because both teams respect each other's arguments and learn from each other by exhausting the literature and innovating, which is far less likely in the world of their counter-interpretation. These prove the clash arguments in this instance. This argument is also false. The argument isn't about debating both sides of negative state action, but it's in general to debating both sides. But lack of specificity means it doesn't apply because debating both sides of this topic doesn't have to justify positive state action. The AF can say that the USFG should reduce conditions for Defense Pact activation with one country, and the NEC can critique that. They can critique the use of the state and say that we should end all defense pacts with all allies. Green assumes a world where you have to say the exact opposite of something on the other side of the debate, which doesn't have to happen. Second, it's inevitable. You'll be at 50% of the time, and prelims and NEC the other 50% of the time. Our interpretation doesn't make SST any worse, and this is an offense against the argument that SST solves any of their offense. Fairness, even if it is just an internal link, the argument that we are going for, it's turns case topicality, straight turns the AF framing issue. Their advocacy statement affirms global linkages as a reduction of alliance commitments, but all their offense depends on them winning. They create those linkages. Our argument is that untopical AFs make mutual indebtedness and debate more difficult, so we should turn the AF, but we don't have to win that because we'll win. That being topical makes those connections easier, so you should understand our interpretation is a mutually exclusive counterplan that solves the AF better. We don't remake racial terrorism because we're not saying get the fuck out, brother. We're saying you could read this with a plan text. The TVA could read the United States federal government should formally permanently end all mutual defense treaties with all of our allies. This would solve the entirety of the app, because if they think the alliances are based on logisticality, and that form of logisticality is a bad thing, then getting rid of them seems to make sense. They haven't given a reason why any of their state bad offense is inherent to affirmative solvency, and you can still be advantages that focus on interpersonal relationships and organizing. Yes, even the TV has a floor, a ceiling, right? Which you said you could have met the bare minimum. The Battistoni evidence, even if it says the impact is concrete, utopias clash is a way to get there, and iteratively test our ideas to figure out which what not only what is the best way to get there, but what is the best idea for that utopia to look like. The last argument, even if fiat is not intrinsic to any level of organizing, fiat with USFG action provides a predictable stasis point for clash and contestation, which we have indicated is a prerequisite to organizing. I think you should vote neg because I'm wearing a Baby Yoda hat, but like I understand that links to individuation disads. Like, feel free to scratch that. Ready for cross-ex.
Okay, cool. First argument is, as an answer to the logistics dissad, you have said we have not said clash good in all instances or maximization, but as an answer to the counter interpretation, you said counter interp doesn't lead to enough clash, it only leads to cap debates. We need better, more clash. Can you reconcile the difference between these two?
I don't think there's a difference, because I think we can say, like, if you're right, it's just about this round and spill in, then there should be some clash within this round. But that's not the same thing as saying that we should take seriously, I don't know, Ann Coulter, who's like, fuck it, white supremacy is the real deal.
Wait,
I see your hands.
That argument is not about like deliberating white supremacists. We've said that the maximization or the prioritization of more clash bad. And then the counter interpretation, you've said that we should not have clash in all
we've also said that, like, I don't think that Green is writing, like, yeah, it's just like a general switch side clash
also
bad,
not Green. This was
but I think okay.
But we'll move
sorry,
on.
I thought Green was combined, but I've answered.
Yeah, we'll move on. The next argument that you've made is like you give this cool story of what apps develop back and forth. Yeah. Why is that intrinsic to your model and not ours?
Because there's a plan text.
But why start at a predictable. The only thing. So like you've read this like cool story. It's like now the app has an advantage to answer the disad. Why does our app not have to cut advantages to answer disads when we've defended them?
Hold on. So I did copy and paste it, so it wasn't about advantages to answer disads. We've also made an argument that
to answer disads.
We also made an argument that there was a spike out there, and because you were
that argument relies on the internal link that the app spikes out. Cool. The last
not necessarily, but I want to give you all the arguments we made for that. I just
don't think the other internal link then.
So like we said that your world is just because there's no defensive state action, it's just we have different starting points, and that's critiques. That's we talk about Afropass, set call,
point, but cool.
Yeah, but the idea is that what's the root cause of it? How do we get to a better endpoint? Like that's what your stuff looks like, and we outlined what those debates look like. But when you read a plan text, there's a lot of
I just don't think you've answered the right counter interpretation. But regardless, I'll move on. Next question.
I answered your counter interpretation.
I'll move on. The last question I have is the first argument that you've made in the speech is that debate is a game and that things spill out of debate. My first question is, can debate be more than a game?
I didn't say things spill out of debate. I said if we're focused on spilling, then you don't solve the racial capitalism aspects of debate. You're the ones who said nothing. So like you've made a claim about scholarship matters, and you've also made a claim about models, and you've also made a claim about, but none of that matters. It's about what happens between us and how we understand each other.
But you've read a piece of evidence in the 1EC that says debating good to create organizations, concrete political strategies that spill out. So my question then is, how does debate spill out?
If it's a question of spill out, then it's like you were saying, it's how we understand each other and how we understand each other's arguments, but we think that clash is key to those things.
And clash goes back to the internal link of only USFG produces clash.
Reading a plan text, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I'm sending it out. It's just one card, so I'm just going to send the body of the email. So the order is going to be the disaddend case. Is there anyone who does not have the card? Okay. Cool. The disadd we're kicking and not going for it. If you contestant one case cannot outweigh that was done above, they spotted ceiling and the risk of they've spotted ceiling 2 proximity 0. We give you ground offense. You can't say that we can get assurance and then say the case outweighs because the ballot doesn't do anything. Fiat is obviously key to negative ground. The ballot does not solve their impacts. 3 focusing on large scale impacts is not depoliticizing, which links to them. Since the 2AC started with a giant range about their advantage, the hapticality it solves the disadd argument doesn't apply. They only limit the Korean alliance. That's not global friendship, which will also be indicted on case the top level case outweighs stuff and Orientalism stuff. Group it. Not there's no one-to-one correlation between securitization and anti-Asian hate crimes. The relationship is obviously more complex. It's between over-sexualization of Asian women, individual blame for COVID, etc. Those are because of security rhetoric, and they don't have a card in it. We also don't link because the reason anti-Asian violence and xenophobia, etc. occurs is not because of fear of war between 2 external countries like the DITSAD describes, but because we fear war with another country. We didn't read a U.S. drawn argument. They also haven't read any evidence in the question. Disadd the world, the answered about the reject util argument. We don't ever access util. We don't even say util or extinction in the card. We just say that we just think that war would be bad because civilians shouldn't get fired bombed for the sake of lofty international relations ideals. The IR offense is not offense if we kick it, but we haven't highlighted what kind of IR we defend. The paternalism disadd wasn't impacted out in the 2AC, but our description fits their model of how countries sort of relate to each other because it describes that there's a multiplicity of factors and actors that contribute to each bilateral alliance, and those sort of relationships should be analyzed with. They say shouldn't abandon just shouldn't be through the MDT, but this proves abuse because the result of the AF doesn't meet reducing alliance commitments if they just say that the MDT is bad case. Vote negative on presumption. They claim the voting app eliminates nation state attempts to impose order, but provide no explanation for how voting app spills up or sufficient interrogation to trigger attempts to impose order. This is offense extend rigorous in law. Their method lacks a direct connection to the broader political struggle that alters material conditions or directly challenges powerful groups and structures that enable globalization and seek to impose order. At best, it means voting app is a symbolic assertion of resistance that doesn't say anything about society that we didn't already know, and at worst, the one you see becomes a how-to presentation that lets nation states, alliance networks, and international organizations learn our tactics and crack down accordingly. The reject presumption argument presumption is not a question of not doing enough, so it's not a criticism that would lead to burnout, but it's about not doing anything at all. It's a theoretical orientation, not a direction of how you should act in the real world. If the AF can do absolutely nothing and still win, one, every AF is unbeatable because I can just get up and say I love puppies and there's no way to resolve that with a solvency claim. 2, it links to any offense about debatability on framework, and 3, it will link to the chance materiality offense because you should have to do something. That we provide uniqueness argument. This is empirically denied by the fact that arguments that don't win ballots get read all the time, like how we just booty bumped Binghamton out of Octo's last round. They still read Beaugerard, and they haven't provided any evidence that winning rounds leads to any more reading of the arguments. The materiality stuff, they haven't provided a warrant or explanation as to how the research in this round or the sort of debates we have will spill up, which was the framework debate. The Markland evidence extended here. Logistics do not control all of society. Datification has not infiltrated numerous social fields because some social fields are not conducive with logistical overdetermination. Markland cites 2 core examples which have not been answered. Forces Congress and lawmaking. Zuckerberg confusing boomers during his Senate hearing proves that lawmakers specifically have not kept up with technological shifts, which mean they can't rationally assume how subjects should behave and try to map them because they're too fucking old to do it. 2, human rights organizations. Integration of tech has improved their operations, but not fundamentally altered the core principles of human rights promotion that guide that tech use, which means it's not overdetermined by the logistics, but rather the ideology behind it, which we should interrogate. Markland uses Bordeaux's concept of habitus to highlight that different social fields have different modes of being in operation that would slow or accelerate technological integration. Any counterexample to their thesis of the world being produced logistically disproves it. Logisticality reduction and everything to its technological utility cannot be true, and social energy is not targeted towards the most rational productive capacity as identified by the examples above, and life is determined by cybernetics. Susan 19. Not all groups are defined by technology. Not all social relations are determined by tech. We end up reducing social arrangements into one overriding force. Progress has economic and cultural and political dimension, often which contain objective and subjective facts. Progress is entangled within this ecosystem, but also intertwined with the economic, cultural, and political systems. All struggles have other dimensions. Demands are expressed in tech, but also in economic, cultural, and political system. Tech is virulent, and all of this proves the logistics good offense and that the read of how the world works to engage in mass and how working to engage in macro institutions is wrong. Logistics operates differently in different fields, and even in hegemonic fields like government and human rights law. Capacity to map out and understand the world's data objects isn't the end telos of those organizations. It is also possible to have engagement in hegemonic institutions like these, and individuals coordinate without being subsumed by their offense about logisticality. I'll also do the logistics good offense here, extend the chance evidence. Status quo movements move from crisis to crisis and promote broad ideals without focusing on the nuances of what we ought to do and how we ought to organize for whatever ends they advocate for. Shan says this is bad because it actively draws people away from movements because they cannot observe material gains or ways that they can participate to improve their own lives. Instead, we should have conversations about the specific tactics we should use to achieve specific material gains, as opposed to symbolically endorsing lofty ideals without a roadmap of how to get there. This is obviously a link to the app, even if they win, that logisticality or logistics are bad or only good in some circumstances. One, think about how they've answered this with logistics can be good without a single example of how those logistics should be employed in the real world. They don't even say we should have stuff like mutual aid, underground hacking workshops, graffiti, or whatever, because they cannot endorse a specific they have not endorsed a specific strategy to reach their ends. They just say that we should be nice to each other and all hold hands on Teletubby Hill under the baby fist sun, but you should assume that their abstract method is incorrect. They assume that their method that makes people feel good about themselves and teach them to behave, knowing what political options are preferable, is actually quite complicated. We can't make those presumptions without debating them out, like on Framework, or having discussions of the material action they would take to get there on case. The whole point of debate is discussing what should happen in theory so you can realistically work towards it. The app is functionally that people should be nice to each other, but it does not make sense because it does not provide specific mechanism by which people can change their behavior. Two, Thomas's internal link explanation on Framework proves that open communication with a strong possibility of contestation is necessary to accessing this offense, because refinement of strategy produced tactical gains is a lifeblood that fuels movements. If we don't have a strategy by which to achieve those ends that people can tangibly look to resolve things, nobody wants to fucking join us because it's not going to do anything for them.
8:36. Stop prep at 2:48. It'll be case then T. I'll be answering the fiat framing.
KJ went to the bathroom, so if you could just give it a second.
My bad.
All right, you can go ahead with the order again. We're about back.
Okay. It'll be case then T. The fiat stuff from the disad will be on T. Is everyone ready? Voted for to embrace sociality as a means of refusing the resolution's logistical expansion. This embraces transnational linkages as a limitation on the mutual defense treaty that aligns with illicit moments of disability that interrupt the rhythm of production in their wild undercurrent of autonomous movements by Black and brown insurgencies from Argentina to BLM, exemplified by Mago reiterations of sin and transnational affective solidarity, such as say Juju now that create an ethic of care that inverts the neoliberal logic of U.S. and imperial violence. Logistics disperses military networks through individualization to maintain necropolitical hierarchies, demonstrated in debate with surveillance and policing of Black debaters and scholarship. Their attempts to mediate calls for the end of this unethical doubt relation is logistics naturalizing the idea that continual death is necessary cost of freedom. Voting F as a refusal of that ultimatum. Presumption one: we meet the plan. It's a mutual defense treaty. There's no reason why we have to spill up from what we do in this round. Two: what happens in here shapes what happens out there. That's the one you see mode numbers. We shouldn't distinguish, between the two because that allows for violent practices to fester in here that spell out later. Three is that they generate uniqueness. The ballot is a neurological rewiring that rejects our logistics in this round to shape our social relations. Four is that the idea that we have a method that doesn't go far enough is the drive of the logistics to impose policy to go to always go further. That drive to maximization that we've already critiqued. The arguments about technology. One, we never said that logistics is tech, but that logistics pursuit to total access and total control is demonstrated by the logic of the algorithm. That's about our evidence. Two is that just because they don't understand tech doesn't mean that it doesn't impact the data collected in almost everything we do, and certainly does impact the way that we talk about debate, especially when we're drawing multiple examples of how they demonstrate that in this debate. Even if there are certain organizations that maintain their social relations in spite of technology, the impact on technologies is undeniable. Also, Miller says there is a possibility for rupture within technology, which means this is a non sequitur. The last argument is just that we don't allow for we don't allow for organization. One is that mutual indebtedness is key to organizing. Extend the chapter highlighting for the 2AC. We need collectivity in order to have organizing, because we can't understand what needs we need to pursue without mutual sociality. Their interpretation leads the imposition of individualized notions of what our needs are and what our telos should be, which means the affirmative is a prerequisite because they lead to violent forms of organizing. Second is that all the case overview examples prove sociality is good with impact turn logistics. Their examples aren't logistics, but logisticality in most of mutual indebtedness framework. At the top, a lot of the negative strategy relies on the idea that they access the cases better, that the case better create social relations because they lead to refinement, but that is not our internal link. This understanding of care and love as the endpoint, i.e. refinement, rather than intrinsic to the process itself, revision, is a distinction between our counterinterpretation and their clash arguments about framing. This debate is not about models because your ballot can't change it, but this debate, but it can change this debate because it is only an affirmation of scholarship. The 2NC concedes that debate does shape our subjectivity. The counterinterpretation imagines debate as a model of revision. The AF must have been a method for eliminating the condition that activate U.S. defense back to top countries. That forms debate is an ongoing mode of study that creates an ethical care to make us more attuned to the impacts of our advocacy on other people, i.e. relationality. That's Moden and Harney. Year after year, the conclusion of a season of debates that regardless of the ethicality of the USFG will be recycled as an actor for the sake of controversy the next year, which naturalizes the state as a legitimate actor. We shouldn't center debates on the USFG. We should deplatform it. Debate isn't solely competitive, and this debate proves that there can be debates over revolutionary strategies and the idea that people only debate for competitive reasons is linked to app offense. People don't just debate to win, but some people are here because they think it's a home, it's a space for care. They like the people, they like doing research. Their homogenization is only competitiveness is our argument about how they invest in logistics. The clash argument, the counterinterpretation solves clash. They get this as intrinsic to the production of alliance commitments. Just because they didn't have a link to defending the MDT as key doesn't mean that there's no clash. Two, they preclude rev debates, and that benefit to our meta allows us to revise our strategies against logistics and orients clash towards ethics. Three, we saw better supportable skills better. Their filters organization through logistics, which fractures solidarity. Remember the terminal impact of clash in this status quo's relationality, which we have impact because the pursuit of maximization in a model of debate emphasizes the telos rather than the ethos of a process. Ground was already done above on the limits. This is the counterinterpretation links. However, the link to our logistics this isn't limits us about the pursuit of maximizing proceduralism. The counterinterpretation is a mode of sociality that we think is good and can happen in a debate. The fairness standard is tautological fairness is good for the game is good for fairness. Second is that even if fairness is good in principle, we've impacted the deployment of fairness in practice of the maintenance of logistics. The logistics that extended their model entrenches the logistics at the level of form through the drive to access. They're calls to limits and calls to preserve fairness and iteration through total access and control over app argumentation eliminates the way that modernity, spatial and temporal differences shape response to the topic in favor of producing logistical subjects. The app counterinterpretation allows for debate on topic but disrupts the drive to perfect argumentative access and control. The impact is logistical governance resulting in racialized violence and debate per the case examples and concepts of improvement, progress, and iterations that become a weapon to delegitimize decolonial scholarship deployed and produced by Black and Brown folks, proven by anti-Black debate practices such as calling the cops on debaters and surveillance. I've already done the ballot framing for why that outweighs and should come first. Topical version of the app. One, doesn't meet their interpretation because the res isn't all alliances. Second, it doesn't solve the aesthetic care because policy reduces it to instrumental focus. The switch side debate argument. Their mode of politics can never create an ethics care. Switch side debate requires separating advocacy from ethics and personal commission from advocacy to maximize discussion and controversy. That's what transforms bad faith devil's advocacy for personal gain into a moral imperative as deliberative democracy to bolster American exceptionalism. That's Green and Hicks. Their argument that they aren't all clash good only proves our arguments that some maximization of clash is bad and why you should divest from their model. The revision is able to solve disagreement, which means that we create sociality. Remember, there's no impact to quantity around with impact to the drive to maximize scholarship protection. There's sociality is in excess of formal alliance commitments, which means that we do meet a reduction of the MDT without increasing alliance commitments. Logistics also makes the argument about social relations being decreased. Non-unique pathologization of Black scholarship as non-productive means unfair losses are enough. We've impact turn their deployment of fairness and exhausting scholarship is the link to the logistics. That is one, it's impossible because there's excess that always escapes capture, and two, it demonstrates the desire to consume and control knowledge production on each successive topic.
227. Go ahead and start it.
Sorry, I just need 30 seconds. All right, sorry.
No worries. The order is just case. Let me know when everybody is good to go. Laurie, okay, I saw the reaction for sure. Let's dance. Vote negative on presumption. You have to ask yourself at the end of the round, what does he have do that's beneficial? I think there are two affirmative ballots. One is that they create or bolster transnational interpersonal relationships which spill up to defense pacts, or the second one is they help people in this run understand relations to their scholarship and to each other. It makes sense that they're walking the line between if there is some spill up stuff, we do good stuff there, but if there's some spill in stuff, we also do good stuff there. But those two ballots are untenable. The first is the first one I want to is the spill up claim. There is no explanation of how helping people understand transnational interpersonal relationships spills up to changes in the defense pacts. Even though we're not going for topicality, the definitions still matter because they indicate that changes in defense pacts have to be legal action. They cannot be extra legal action. Yes, they have examples of when transnational organizing may put pressure on anti-militarism movements, but there's no explanation of how that spills up. If there is an explanation, there is an independent effects T argument that is outside of topicality. You should read a plan text, but rather that the effects of the plan are topical, which is uniquely bad for limits in ground. This is something that is outside of any of their other T offense, because it's not saying that you have to read a plan text, but rather that the immediate action of the plan has to be topical, rather than the effects of the plan. That these were conceded where and they straight turn a lot of the affirmative impacts for the same reason it's a procedural, and they straight turn the F impacts for the same reason identified in the 2 and C, mainly because they prevent any movement building or concrete organizing. They have a an argument that tactics are key while relationality and haptics exist now. The question is whether or not they produce something, or something emerges of this tactic that solves something or does something for someone. But they have not met that burden because there's been a lack of explanation. So the other argument they could go for is that they help people within the round understand their relationship to each other and to their scholarship. But again, there's no explanation of how they do this, and there's no reason why a ballot is key to any of these things. The reading of the 1C and the performance of the 1C alone should have been enough. Should have been enough to help us understand our scholarship, but they have not articulated the reason why a ballot is key. They have made an argument that while it sounds pretty cool that the ballot is a form of neurological rewiring, they have not said why this is the case. That we think that the ballot only assigns a winner and a loser in prelims and assigns speaker points, but obviously not in quarters of CEDA. But this the ballot is not neurological rewiring. If that argument was true, then all of the previous W should have been a form of neurological rewiring, or should have gotten the current judges or even the pool at CEDA to rethink their relationships to each other and to their scholarship. But that's not been the case. People like Binghamton are still going to read that Baudrillard after they make the same arguments. The last argument on presumption that they've said is that we meet that the plan is a mutual defense treaty. They have not read a counter definition card. We said that alliance commitments are formalized treaties. Our evidence from the 1C on T outlines what that is, and there's also no engagement of how they change mutual defense treaties or defense pacts. It's about Article 5 commitments, which they obviously do not affect. Yes, they may increase relations in the net between groups, or increase that interpersonal relationships, but one, that's not MDT. 2, there's no explanation of why that's true for them. And 3, there's no productivity or utilization arguments, because it's like policing against Black debaters when it comes to read a plan text. The majority of Black debaters, people are not reading text with plans. People are not reading a plan text. I'd say the majority of Black debaters are reading apps that do not defend state action, and that's okay. But that just goes to say that even in those debates, people still need to say what the 1AC does and how it helps somebody or how it does something. Asking for like that explanation of how we get to this concrete utopia is not a bad thing. It's not policing. It's not anti-black. It's not saying get the fuck out. It's saying that there are real world, if they win the argument that there are real world consequences and debaters are real people, then that means that they still have to, then that means that they still have to provide some explanation of how they get there. That's not policing. It's just doing your job as an organizer if you're truly an organizer. They've conceded our movement participation offense. Nobody wants to join a relationship or a movement that cannot produce examples of material gains. That shouts evidence the F can't be a prerequisite because presenting material solutions must come before a movement can grow. This means you do not have people joining your new mode of relations, which turns the F absent an explanation of what the material F does. If the ballot is an ecological rewiring, you should hold it to the standards of having to explain something. The last thing I need to do is handle their theory of also presumption stuff. It is offense. The Regacos and law evidence indicates that their method lacks a direct connection to broader political structures that alters material conditions or directly challenges the powerful groups and structures that enable globalization, seek to impose order. It means at best it means a voting app. The voting app is a form of habitality and helps relationships or resistance, but that doesn't do anything about the society we didn't already know. And at worst, it becomes co-opted because it's how to presentation. Extend the Markland evidence, its defense against their theory of power, even if the people in Congress didn't understand it. This is one example that disproves their theory of power because it means that the world is not overwritten. It's not overwritten with technological algorithms. Logistics don't control all of society. Datafication is not infiltrated in numerous social fields because some social fields are not conducive with logistical overdetermination. Markland cites two examples. I've already done the Zuckerberg one, but the second one was human rights organizations. Integration of tech has improved their operations, but not fundamentally alter their core principles of human rights promotion and guides tech use. They've conceded the Susan evidence that life is not determined by cybernetics, that not all social groups are defined by social technology, and not all social relations are defined by technology. These are sufficient to disprove their theories of power, even if they think a rupture can happen. That rupture is not necessary because the rupture is already the status quo. If it's true, and all this proves our logistic goods. We're not going to go for the logistics good offense, but we will go for it as a reason why engaging macro political institutions is a good thing. The mutual indebtedness and key to organizing stuff, like the fiat stuff on the bottom, doesn't really implicate the presumption ballot because it doesn't prove They haven't proved that the ballot is key to more mutual indebtedness, and they haven't proved it's key to organizing. There's also even if there's no endpoint, there still has to be some conversation over the steps to get to such an endpoint, or imagine such an endpoint in a way that not just could be contested, but also, allows for some back and forth over that. They didn't do that, so presumption ballot.
248.
The order will be case. I'll do some like the T stuff that they've done on the case vote. Okay, thumbs up. Cool. The 2-NR has gone for 6 minutes of terminal defense to the affirmative that has no external point of offense. The only point in which he even says the word offense is when they get to the floor and no one joins your movement. That is terminal defense saying the movement does not succeed. It is not offense, which means you have to be 100% sure that the case does not solve or that they do not link to any of our dissets in order to vote negative. I'll do the case debate here. Logistics is the condition, the possibility for U.S. empire militarism, creating necropolitical hierarchies that containerize and individuate subjects while installing a neoliberal logic of FXC with the system of logistical management as illustrated by the MDT in the aftermath of the Korean War. Is extremely problematic when you say that there's no evidence of spill up and have dropped every single example from the 2AC and the 1AR exemplified by MAGO, reiteration of the dissent, transnational affective solidarity, such as Shave Jeju now that create the haptic indebtedness that is required to pressure governments to change practices of the status quo. Even if this is not immediate, it still results in the termination of defense pacts. But I'll answer FXT in a little bit. The spill up evidence, the Beller evidence says that you should not separate the difference between spill up and spill in, or the understanding of materiality versus what that is not material. Instead, you should understand how our orientations in debate, how we orient ourselves, our scholarship, our relations to different things are able to scale up and spill into different phases of logistics. There's only a risk that of the latter, not the former, which means they don't have offense to this argument, and there's only a risk that it do so, proven by every example as well as the Beller evidence. I will extend it here here properly because their only answers are 3, and they do not get any of them. One is that why is the ballot key to alternative funds? They've dropped the 2AC and the 1A argument that you should not insert your cognitive labor into one of logistics because they recirculates the system, i.e. this is our arguments that about how we work the code. The code does not just work us, which means your ballot is an affirmation of what scholarship is good, what orientations should be had, and how those orientations should be held. Other people not changing their mind does not answer this argument because it's a question of your affirmation within one, which should not be one of logistics. It is rather a continuous process that happens over and over again. To say that it's the status quo is not responsive because it's not a one-off event that happens through previous judgment in the first place. The FXT arguments are answered because 1, they have conceded the counter-interpretation mandates that the affirmative must limit the mutual defense treaty with one of our topic countries. They have confused and conflated burdens, one between solvency and topicality. Our model mandates that someone limit the conditions of the mutual defense treaty. Also, you should be very clear that the 2NR extends a limits and a ground standard, but does not say the word predictability. This is important because they have conceded that the counter-interpretation still solves ground, i.e. it gives all topic dissets and counterplans, but it does not maximize that ground, which is the link to our logistics dissent that they have not answered by name in the 2NR, which means their affects T violation still links to logistics dissent. It is the maximization of clash, i.e. to say that yes, we might have some under your model, but it's still, i.e. the 2NC's characterization of saying it is only the cap K is our point, is that the cap K is the good, valuable intrinsic process as well as dissets and counterplans that evolve over the course of the season, but to demand more is to demand improvement. It is one of logistical sovereignty, which is a conceded impact turn to their framing of affects T and a reason to vote AF. The last reason is that they have dropped that this is not a question of models of debate, i.e. what the AF justifies, but rather a question of this debate and their scholarship within it. There's no one-to-one correlation between voting AF and a question of the broader model that we inspire, but rather the scholarship that they endorse. So a 1% risk that they link to our logistics or any other offense that I've gone to this flow do not solve the case means they cannot access it. The last argument about revolutionary organizing, we've impact turned this and said that logistical organizing focuses on the end point. It focuses on where we ought to go, what those institutional changes need to be. We have rather said you should focus on the process itself. This is reiterated in the 1AR like 6 times, and they've dropped it every single time. It is about the process, the people coming together, how we form those relations, and the focus on the latter individuates us and recuperates the system of logistics and the status quo because it doesn't allow us to come together, which is the key internal link to resolving the case, which means that we have impact on their frame of how they've asked us to organize and said that is one that is logistical. Again, you can vote on this argument alone because they don't have an offensive argument, but they've dropped that you should reject your investment in logistics. Now, the last argument, the couple of last arguments that the explanation of utopia links to logistics said that I did above, they've asked us to be concrete. What is those individual organizing? Our argument is that we should not individuate our politics to the point in which we prescribe those organizations, but rather create an ethos of care. This is what the 2AC and the 1A are get at when they say that is the question of how we ought to orient our political models and political energy. This is how we ought to do so within debate, because that is what orients ourselves outside debate. Remember, they have dropped the 1A explicit concession that debate does shape our subjectivity. They've read a card on it in the 1NC, as well as extended it in the 2NC, and said that topical debate is key to create those modes of organization of sociality. This gives offense to, and credence to our arguments that debate is able to create those linkages, but a 1% risk of a disad means that we've internally turned their ability to do so. The next argument about examples or material people, it's kind of ironic because they have dropped our examples and then said we don't have any. Save Jetu now, Mago, and the reiterations of dissent was all extended above, as well as they dropped the descriptions in the 1AC, i.e. that there are harms occurring in South Korea and only the end of the mutual defense treaty, which is what the receipts for how and what we solve, as well as the accumulation of strategies in the status quo. The next argument about you don't challenge anything and it gets co-opted. Nonsense. We have said that co-option is the status quo, i.e. logistics containerizes us and seeks to individuate us, but there's a glitch, there's a neurofiring that can happen. This is the Beller evidence in which we can reappropriate those. This is the difference between logistics and logisticality. It's not that all organization is bad, all politics are bad, but it's a question of how those politics are framed, i.e. not a question of the end goal, but the process itself, and that process is valuable. The human rights example, I don't know why they extended it. This argument didn't make much sense in the block, and it definitely does not in the 2NR because they've extended a sentence. Our argument is that yes, there are ruptures now, but we should capitalize on those ruptures by creating global linkages that are able to pressure those governments as well as organizations that are flustered now. The macro spill up, spill in argument. Our argument is not that we shouldn't create macro institutions, but rather it should be bottom up, not top down, which they do not have a defense of. Good debate. Good debate.
Good job, folks.
All right, I think we have a decision, but
KJ just went to the bathroom.
yeah, Brian's got to come and announce it anyway, so
For sure.
we don't know what it is, but I assume that means I was the last one.
Hi, everybody. We have a decision if everyone's around. And I believe I see everybody. Okay, I see a thumbs up from Logri, so I think we're good to go. Thank you all so much for all the hard work it took to get to the Elite Eight of the 2021 CEDA National Championship. And congratulations on an amazing debate. The winner on a 3-0 decision is the University of Texas. Congratulations, y'all. Excellent tournament, Michigan. Congrats, y'all. And I'll turn it over to the judges.
I guess I can start. I thought it was a valiant effort in the 2&R, and I thought about it for a long time because I admit that I don't think that there's a whole lot of solvency to the affirmative, and I do have trouble articulating like a complete, I don't know, reason to vote F. But I think I can piece together the argument that voting affirmative affirms the scholarship outside of a logistical frame, and that while that doesn't have to solve a whole lot, if there's a hope that that might create a good form of organizing, whether because of this, basically because there's not a difference between in and out or macro and micro politics, then that's enough. And I don't think it's a lot, but I don't think it has to be very much based on the way the 2&R sets it up just on a presumption ballot. So, I mean, I was thinking a lot about some things that the 2&R might have done to convince me. And I think maybe a little more theory about what presumption means at the top, like what are the check boxes that the F has to fill out, and then like kind of say, look, it's, you know, I don't know, like this is stock issues, but it's like the table without one of the legs, it doesn't stand, or just like a little bit more. I can basically allow me to hang my hat on a little bit more doubt, but as is, it's just kind of like presumption means we win, and so that's very hard there. So anyway, so it's a tough road, and I think that they have that there. I thought though the way you approached everything was great, and a little like more on the offense there would be helpful. I don't know. Again, it's a very tough road. I sort of thought. I mean, I thought without making too grand of a pronouncement, I thought T was not didn't necessarily have to be abandoned. I don't know that it, but I thought things were going fine on T. I thought the 2 and C was good. So I think it seems to me that these arguments fit better as reasons why the counterinterpretation doesn't solve its impacts, and so kind of they're more impact framing things for you. So anyway, but that's the short version.
I'll go next. You good, Trip?
Yeah.
First, I just want to say to Michigan, I'd never judged you before last round, and I really enjoyed judging you these last 2 debates. So thank you so much for letting me judge these debates. I really, really enjoyed them, and I told Kurt as much. But it was a pleasure to judge you all these 2 last debates. I wish I could have judged you more. I agree with Trip, and I differ a tiny bit because I was really excited to vote on effects topicality. And I think that there's a 2 and R where it's like maybe just effects topicality, but as it stands, I think that it's really tough to just look at the set of negative arguments and be like, yep, AF solves 0%. It's really different than the last debate where they were like, yep, we solve 0%. And they like agreed with you or whatever. But in this debate, it's just like, I don't think it's 0%. It might approach 0, but I don't think it's 0%, which means that it's really tough for me to just like, yep, presumption. And then so after I decided that, I was like, okay, but that doesn't make it over for the negative team. What about FXT? I think maybe I could vote on FXT because I don't think there's an on-point answer to it in the 1AR. There's some floating stuff and some understanding of the counterinterpretation stuff, blah, blah. And I think that in order for that to occur, I just need an answer to the maximization DA and sort of a more sort of impacted out explanation for why X topicality is a reason to reject the F, and just like bread and butter stuff like, it proves that the resolution alone is insufficient, proves the immediate action alone is insufficient, and the affirmative has it backwards. We haven't confused solvency. This is an argument made in the 2AR, but it's like they confuse solvency with topicality, not us. Your immediate action has to be a reduction of the conditions. You relied on solvency to prove that, which is bad. So I thought that I could have done that, but I don't think that impact work was there. So ultimately, then I decided that I got to vote F. So, but I want to re-emphasize that it was an absolute pleasure to judge you these last 2 debates. Thank you so much. And I just noticed your little comment in chat. Not only did I change my hat, I changed my entire outfit for the debate and changed locations. So, but great work, great work.
So I also thought this was a fantastic debate. I think you should have gone for T, right? Like a lot of this hinges on sort of the debate about what comes out from the Battistoni evidence. I think there are arguments that you can make, like the main response sort of coming out of the top of the 1AR is sort of this distinction between relationality as an intrinsic part of the process versus sort of an end goal or telos. And I think like at a certain point, you just need to just defend that, right? Like the card is about organizing for an end. You have to convince people to sort of, build power and organizations and draw people together. And I think like just sitting on that seems like a viable option, right? Like intrinsic relationality just as a process of sort of being together under conditions of modernity is like, even if that's true, that's probably not a, broad condition for sort of overthrowing racial capital. But anyway, I largely agree with the decision, of the other judges. I think there are sort of a handful of points. I wish that some of the stuff on case about the nature of logistics not being totalizing had been a counter advocacy. Because I feel like you get in a lot of trouble towards the end of the debate when some of these arguments are good and like they need to be doing something, right? Like these arguments about the way in which human rights organizations can utilize technology while not fundamentally changing sort of the organizing principles behind them. I think that when you get into a question of like the app says logistics bad, endorses sort of, moments of glitch or sabotage that disrupt the system as it reaches the apex of perfection of logistical flows. I think a counter method that says like, no, we should just take up and fight on the plane of those technologies with some of this broader stuff about like logistics isn't totalizing, would be an effective way to go. The offensive argument, I suppose, that I look at most in the 2NR is this extension of the Rogakos evidence. I don't think it's handled well in the 1AR, but it's barely extended for more than a sentence in the 2NR. Where like there's a moment mid-speech where you're like offense, and then you say it for a sentence about how folks will spy and co-opt, and then you just move on. I think like in a world where you want to go for presumption, sort of that type of argument has to play center stage. And if you do want to go sort of all in on they don't have any engagement, you need to leverage that in terms of uniqueness claims, right? I.e., when they cite examples, which they do, of like Save Jeju Island, you need to be making arguments that like those are not reasons why the affirmative is a good idea. Those are reasons why the affirmative is not inherent, right? The movements that they discuss always exist, always will exist. There's only a risk that the app's method is a distraction from that, right? Like you need to flip the direction that uniqueness is going in here if you want to go for this sort of like very more defensive presumption line. But I do think you're in sort of a tough spot here because like the app does extend examples. They're just extremely blippy, like aggressively so. You mentioned, I think on the app, Mago and reiterative dissent a few times, and I have just no idea what those are. The Save Jeju Island one does come through a few times. I'm at least like, okay, I know what that is. But I think, in a world where there's this presumption press, just taking a minute at the top of the 2AR to really sit on them would be sort of the way to go. But yeah, so those are some comments. But I, pretty much voted the same way.
Just because I'll forget if I don't pipe up the example thing for the AF team. Yeah, it was just like bam, 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 bam. I just kept hearing the word MAGA. I don't know.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know if I'm like, I heard it wrong. That was like one of the first ones in the list of examples I just kept hearing. So if this debate had come down to like the examples and the depth of explanation or understanding or just like having them, I'm not sure I could have been like, yeah, these are the ones. I'm not sure I could have done that.
Yeah, all I got was glitch. Like there's a glitch. So I don't know if there were examples, like I'm sure I heard them, but they didn't make it down on my flow. So it was the process there. But
I think that you just need to, in cross-ex seize a moment to really like talk about these in a way that like really conveys them. Like in the 1AR, I get talking about like BLM and transnational coalitions with like Save Jeju Island, and the Jeju Island stuff appears all over, but it does need to be developed a lot more, because otherwise you rest too much on this sort of scholarship in-round argument.
Hey, so, I'm sorry, Texas, do you have questions? Okay, so great debate, everybody. Texans, good luck in the semis. Michigan, once again, great debate. Thank you so much. Just excellent. Great work. And great, good luck in the semis, Texas. All right, great tournament, everybody. Take care, be well.
Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much for judging, and congratulations, Michigan.